Hi, I'm Deniz,
And I'm Tom.
and welcome to our podcast, Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
We created our podcast for you, our nonprofit colleagues. As nonprofit professionals with over 50 years of experience combined, we've led nonprofit hospitals, university programs, campaigns that have transformed cities, communities, and campuses. We're from Chicago and Detroit, and now we're in the Pacific Northwest. Our work has taken us across the country from the Midwest to Seattle, to Portland, California, and nationally. We've seen it, lived it, and have learned from it.
We've all been through a lot as nonprofit professionals, and we hear you, we see you, and we understand. We know you too are used to wearing many hats. It can be exhausting, but we come together with the shared mission to transform the world. Because We've Been in Your Shoes is a podcast for you, us, and our entire nonprofit community, sharing and learning from one another so we can continue to innovate and unleash capacity for good. We'll hear from colleagues and peers, discuss emerging issues in the sector, and provide you with key takeaways and useful tips to support you in all you do. We believe that people and philanthropy equal possibilities. Join us on the Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast with new topics and special guests. Thank you for joining us for the conclusion of Boundaries and Burnout. And here's where we left off. We're talking about boundaries too at work. We also don't carve out time for employees and colleagues to connect with each other, specifically to support each other when we notice someone needs a little help. So that's something I wanted to bring up too.
I think you're right in those. Obviously, I believe, when I think about research, I totally go with research. I believe in it. It's science-based. There's the one thing I think we have to be careful about is how. I was in a meeting the other day and we were talking about embarrassment. Today, people are still embarrassed of admitting that I am not able to do this. I'm burning out.
They're embarrassed. That's a great point.
They're embarrassed about it. So it's almost like, how do we make it the norm that you shouldn't be embarrassed? Because it's going to be challenging for any of us to go to someone and make an assumption because we really don't know. They sometimes need to stand up. But as you mentioned, we need to at least, is there a way to say, hey, how are you doing today? Just leave it at that. Don't say anything. I would recommend don't say anything like, I've noticed this. You're not showing up on time, Just how are you doing today?
Yeah.
And that person
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good example of a good leader.
How are you doing today? Is there anything getting in your way? Are there any barriers that's preventing you from doing what you need to do? Not doing your work, but from doing what you need to do. And doing what you need to do, maybe I just need to take a day off. Okay, do it.
Yeah.
Do it,
Yeah. I think it's important to not be punitive in that conversation with that colleague, especially if you're managing them. I think you just nailed it. People are embarrassed and they also see it as a sign of weakness if they acknowledge that, any of those feelings around burnout and stress, they feel like they're weak. And I think our system rewards those that we see are strong. And those that are weak are, kind of oftentimes left alone to fend for themselves. And then they end up exiting the organization because they don't have the support.
That's right. And let me just emphasize one thing. As leaders, you also need to model the behavior. You cannot tell your team, take some time off, do this, get some rest, and then you're not doing it because that sends a mixed message.
I agree.
And I know, and I can tell you right now, I'm guilty of doing that in years past. I've learned
Me too.
that was not the proper thing to do. There were two members I remember would come up to me all the time, like, you keep telling us to take time off, but you don't do it. So it's making us feel guilty. And at first, I remember thinking about these conversations.
Wow.
I would look back and think, how do you feel guilty about that? This is my time. Now, today, I get it. Today, I will model a different behavior. I promise myself that I will take care of myself better, take the time off, and put those boundaries around myself as well.
That's a good point, modeling that, because it does make someone feel guilty, or if like, wow, my boss isn't doing it, but they're going to start thinking, wow, they're giving me all this time off. Maybe it's because they don't think I'm capable of doing the work. That's a really good point. So in those environments, as a leader and manager, what were you able to say to that colleague that, wow, you're our leader and supervisor, you're not taking that time off? What was your response?
At that time, I didn't have a response. I remember my response might have been more like, well, I like doing what I'm doing, or I feel I'm okay. And it just, that's what I said back then. Today, I would not do that. Today, after, these last 3 years, definitely I am taking the time. I use the word boundaries in my current workspace all the time. Speaking to staff, colleagues, I'm using those words. I'm talking about it more and more, and I'm modeling the behavior as well.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
yeah. But have you used mindfulness practices in your team meetings? I've seen that. I've been in organizations where we've done that, but mindfulness, especially in group meetings, have you seen that? And have you seen that as a trend?
If I understand what you're saying, is that where the beginning of the meetings everyone just take a few minutes to close our eyes and just breathe
Yeah.
deep, something like that. I've been in meetings that have done that, but I've not done it in my own team meetings, mainly because it's been over Zoom. But it's a great
Mm-hmm.
point. It doesn't mean that we cannot do it over Zoom. It's a great point. I think one of the things I'm still seeing, definitely with my team, is this need to get in and like, okay, we have this 1 hour meeting. Here's the agenda. We need to be efficient, and as I'm looking at the mental boundaries and what we can do better, it's interesting to me is that on one side it says our meetings need to be right on time, ABCD. On the other side is saying no, we need to make our meetings a little bit, as you mentioned, let's take the time to breathe, to model certain things. So there is a
Mm-hmm.
conflict going on right now with that. Can we
Yeah.
combine the two? Or, for example, does staff want to get in and get this meeting done and out? Well, that's not being intentional in our
Yeah.
meetings. Maybe what we need to do is like in our meeting, instead of trying to cover so much, we cover 3 to 5 things that we need to cover. I don't, I don't,
Yeah. Manageable. I've been in I've seen that more and more, and I actually do a lot of this where one of the things that I also with making sure that we recognize, take a breath. I think it's called stop, but you take a breath, you evaluate before you react, your own response. So take that brief moment to evaluate your response before you blurt it out. And the other thing is lifting up your values, centering values for that team and that team meeting. So if one of your values is respect, listening, active listening, giving space, and centering time to all take a moment of reflection before and after the meeting. If you set those, I think everyone starts to get used to that routine. But you want to make sure that it's not a barrier or impediment to addressing the agenda and getting some actionable activities in place, because there are some colleagues that just want, what are the 3 items on the agenda? I just want to talk through this and then I need to leave. But we also need to accommodate those that need more time to process the information and assess how they're a
yeah,
part of that action item or that agenda item. And so I think it's a balance. It's challenging.
it is. And you might have heard me laugh when you mentioned, I just need to get in, do these things, and I need to leave.
Yes,
And I know you saw my face, the audience can't see that, but because I've worked with
that's what we used to do in Detroit
to get in,
when I was there.
when I look back on those types of that comment tells me, and I know I was there too, I was not intentionally invested in that meeting. I was going to meeting because I had to go. So maybe that's part of it too, is a meeting more about what is the meeting about? How does everyone, for whoever's leading the meeting, start thinking about that? That means that person has to be intentional about why we're having a meeting, right? Do we need a meeting? Uh, so, for example, I do a weekly meeting. I've always done weekly meetings, and I still think those are important.
Are that one-on-one or are you with your big team?
The team, a weekly meeting, because it gives us a chance to see what's coming up, but how does the whole team connect to a project? So I believe
Mhm.
the one-on-ones depends. I've done one-on-ones that's every other week, one-on-ones that's every week. In the beginning, I think when I'm new to an organization, I'll probably do a one-on-one with team members for at least the first 6 months, maybe even 9 months. After that,
Yeah, I do that too.
yeah, I'll switch off and let that person decide on what makes sense every week, because it doesn't mean that person or I do not have access to whoever we need to talk
Mhm.
to, right? Although I think it is what I've learned with one person in particular I've worked with, that for me to come up to them and say, hey, this, that, and this, it was, they needed time to process. So I had to
Yeah.
be aware of that, to send something out to them ahead of time or send them agenda, or I had to go up to them like, hey, next week, can we talk about these items so they could process it?
Yeah.
I had to think that.
That's a yeah, I think, just recognizing, also adjusting and adapting to the different work styles and preferences of your team members is really also a really good practice because you also, which we'll talk about emotional intelligence, I'm sure later, but I use, having your self awareness, self management, and then social awareness. Those are the three core aspects of emotional intelligence. And then also being a generous leader. So we don't talk about that, but in the nonprofit space and the generous and empathetic leader, I will share with you, I think more women are empathetic leaders. And I think organization cultures are changing to have more of a feminist and feminine mindset because that allows for I believe, and there are studies and organizations that are shifting to that to recognize centering the individual, that space and that time to process, and recognizing and leading with empathy to understand the challenges, the opportunities, or the pathways and obstacles a colleague may be experiencing. And so, by being empathetic and lifting up and acknowledging their challenge, their opportunity, or a barrier, whatever that is, and helping them work through that or pursue that opportunity is really a responsibility also of the leader. So, being that generous, empathetic leader, I think more employees and colleagues thrive in that culture too. And I think the pandemic has shown we need to shift in that direction. But I'd love to talk more about that feminine and feminist mindset in the culture of organizations. There are a couple major nonprofits that actually are pulling that into their mission statements. And we'll kind of do some more research and share with our audience, but I'm finding that is actually you know, a value that organizations are looking for, people who can embody and practice empathetic and generous leadership.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, or I'll present a series of questions. I want our audience to think about it too. I want you to answer it, and I'll answer as well.
Okay,
My first
I
question,
like this.
yes. How do you say no? And think about it in two ways. First, think about it in the workplace. How would you say no? And I'm not going to give you any criteria. I want you to think about it for a second.
When someone approaches something to me where I feel that instantly I do sometimes want to say no, what I've been practicing is I want to hear more information so I have a better idea as to what you're asking. And how we can actually explore it because not everything is possible. So I usually respond that way. But I think every idea, every opportunity to ask questions and to explore should be given that chance. And it's not an immediate no. But I've been practicing to do that because I grew up not grew up, but I worked in an environment that in other parts of the country are very just like, "We gotta stick to the mission. We gotta stick to this. If it doesn't meet this, we can't explore that." And over the last 10 years, I've really moved away from, well, they say we can't do it, the old idea of, you know, I want you to jump, and then you usually used to say, "Well, okay, how high do you need me to jump?" I think that has gone away, and so now I've been
Yeah.
practicing making sure that every question has a possibility and an avenue to explore. So, maybe the resources aren't there, but let's
Hmm.
explore it, or let's put it in a, kind of like a futures, idea or a futures planning, and so I do encourage colleagues to actually write it down and create I do it. I actually create something like, hopes and dreams kind of initiatives, or I'll list, I have a document where it's a bunch of questions or ideas that I have, and I like to lift that up. But so for me, How do I respond? I try not to say no. It is hard because you're also working with organization initiatives and funding priorities, but yet you have creativity and engagement and you want to encourage that. So, making sure that you as a leader are bringing all sides to the question or the exploration of something before you just say no.
I like that. You know,
It's hard. I'm practicing. I'm practicing. I think many people are practicing that.
I think in the past, I would have said, "Can I get back to you?" before I said yes. But in the past, I would have forgotten what the question was. I would have forgotten what the ask was. You know, it's like, wait, what was this again? Let me circle back to it. So
Yeah.
more than likely, I will still process and say, let me get back to you. Let me think this through. But I like what you just said. I think I'm more now saying more things like, if I say it's not so much no, it is, well, you know what? Now that it's, I asked the question, and I think as I'm processing what I'm doing, I think I'm still doing the "Can I get back to you?" because I don't know yet. I don't know where this fits. I don't know how to answer this question.
That's a good answer. I mean, because
Yeah,
it's you're at least giving, you're gonna process it because that's how you're like, "Okay, wow, this is new to me. This probably could, be, we can't go in this direction, so the answer may be a no." But I think you're accepting it, and I think
yeah,
that's the colleague that poses that question or that idea, I think that should give them something that at least they were heard.
mhm,
I think that's what I like when I've shared, an idea or a process or an exploration of something, I respond better, and I actually respect that, colleague or that supervisor that says, "Let me get back with you.
mm,
I heard you. Let's do some more, and see if that's a possibility."
yeah.
I respond better than someone and back in the many years ago, having been in those shoes before too, when you hear that no, it's discouraging.
It is, but you know what? I like the way you did because what you said earlier, you responded with empathy. That's why I think
Yes.
what made me stall even on my no, because I think my no was more in my brain. I'm like, no, that's what I'm really getting at. I was like, no. I think though that you responded with more empathy, trying to understand the possibilities of where this might go.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I really respond to yours. And I need to kind of explore saying no more and what does it mean. One of the things I'm very good at saying, as you and I have talked about this, I protect my weekends now and I protect my evenings.
I love that you do that. I'm trying to model that.
Yeah, I really do, and I wouldn't have done it 3 years ago because I'll tell you right now, if I had to get something done, I would go to work. So what I'm doing right now is, if I can't do it in the work hours, I refuse. I'm refusing to do it now on the weekends. I will not do it on the weekends. Now they're going to,
You are a leader that we need more of
well,
because we need to model that.
let's see how long this lasts. I'm going to really try to remember this. Now there are going to be events, as you mentioned in our work. We're going to do events. That's going to be in the evenings. They're going to be
Yeah.
board meetings and committee meetings, and so those things are necessary. But what I won't do is like, oh, I couldn't do this during the work hours, so I'll bring it home to get it done. I won't do that. That I will not. Now,
Actually, it's not productive either because the resources you need are typically, working with other people's hours and,
here's
it
one of the things that
yeah.
but here's the challenge. Because we're working from home, it's easy to blur those hours. It is so easy to
Yes.
cross.
So true.
That's what we have to be careful about. That's exactly what we have to be careful about.
Yeah, blurring those hours of like, "Okay, it'll take me 15 minutes to get it done." But I think everybody knows that 15 minutes is actually an hour and a half
That's right. Yes.
because you have disruptions. You also are not in a place that you have necessarily always access to everything. And so I've also been trying to manage what does it really take for me to actually accomplish that? Well, people are like, oh my God, you are so fast. And I think sometimes that's not a good thing because I'm like, if I'm that fast, is it that I've been working so hard and I've blurred my hours? And the reason when someone says to me, "You're so fast," is because 'cause I've worked until midnight often
Yeah.
to get it
Yeah.
done. And so that's the other thing, it's like I'm creating well, actually, I'm fast, but it's because I stayed up and I worked until well past midnight to turn it around for you, even though it could have held off for another week. And so, when I do hear that, it's, well, actually, I worked 16 hours on it in a time frame that was beyond working hours, and
Mhm.
so that's not healthy either. And so I think I also have been guilty of, contributing to, and, feeling that stress because I'm responding to the stress, and I'm afraid of being seen as weak, and afraid of not being able to accomplish it in this new setting or this new environment. And so
Mm,
that's also been
okay.
challenging too. Have you felt
Here's the
that?
next
I mean, like, have you felt that that's why you're trying to preserve your weekends and hours because it's not realistic
It is not, but,
to
I
turn things around that quickly.
it's not I'm in this new space right now, and I think since I took on a new job, it's almost like I'm starting fresh and new. It goes back to the Phoenix, and as you mentioned, a new space, spring. And because I started this new gig, I come in now with these boundaries that it's easier, I think, to come like, I'm gonna set these boundaries. Whereas before there was patterns set before, when I'm working. I'm trying to watch for those possible negative patterns that I may be setting and really using the word physically, saying the word, looking at examples of boundaries. And so that's just a reminder to me not to get back into those old patterns. And there have been times it slipped a little bit. One time I felt pressured into getting something done. I worked till about maybe 7:30, and I asked
Well,
myself,
yeah.
why did I do that? You know what it was? It was a feeling of guilt. And the feeling of guilt then led to embarrassment, that I was letting people down and what I would look like. That I placed it on me. And I had to really dig into that feeling of guilt, which made me feel that I would look a certain way. It made me feel that I wouldn't be then represented a certain way. So I realized that was on me.
Yeah.
And I decided, okay, as long as I need to understand why did I work till 7:30 so I could then tackle what was really happening. If that
Yeah.
makes sense, yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
so I'm trying to clear those unhealthy, uh, things out of my brain so I can set more positive boundaries, and I wanna stick to this boundary topic, but here's the next question: how do you create structure? That's a broad-based question, and all I'm
That's
asking
a
is to give
hard
you
question.
one example, and I want the audience to think about this too. How do you create structure? And just one example of it, it could be home, because let's face it, we need to create boundaries even in our home space with our family and friends. But for now, I'm thinking of work. How do you create structure in the work you do? Not the work you're at, but the work you do.
That's a really awesome question because I don't have the answers. I think I'm learning to create structure, which I guess kind of leans also into boundaries. But structure is also I see as using organization tools,
Yes, yes.
and so the thing sometimes, and the thing that I struggle with sometimes, and I know I'm not alone in this, is creating my systems, my digital computer systems to be structured and more organized. But because I have left the confines of like the shared document system, like the processes that before the pandemic we were all using largely in organizations and those files and resources, and shifting to now creating something on my own, um, but being able to like, wow, okay, now they have this new technology, or we're using this app to do our file sharing. That's really hard because I now have so many introduced new, I want to say organization tools, digital organization tools that I find are actually creating more work for me to understand and not efficient. So I am still trying to understand how to eliminate the tools that don't work for me, build for tools that allow for the structure of my workday to be efficient and to maximize the resources that I do like, that I do resource. At my last place, I had like a new operating system, and then I had 6 different apps. When in my previous place, we had one app that did everything. And so that shift has been challenging because 6 different sources creates for me chaos and disorganization. And I like to organize, as people know. I like it kind of clean and organized and creating structure so everyone understands the flow of our file formats. Everyone, it's intuitive, I guess. So for me, how I try to create structure is just more intuitive, um, and easy to access. But it's
Mm.
something that I'm still discovering new tools that may be better than the one I'm using, but, I don't really have a solid answer because I'm still trying to navigate. How do you create structure, especially virtual, using digital tools, new ones being created and introduced all the time? So, but how do you create structure?
And I'm smiling at you right now because the next question after that would have been, how do you use technology to help you set boundaries? So
Oh,
you just
yeah.
so, so for me, boundaries are creating that structure. It goes back to tools that you mentioned. One specific thing I definitely do is that using my calendar. I have my Google Calendar, and so I have a work calendar, and I
Is
have
that digital, your work calendar, or is that a calendar
work
book?
yeah, and then I have my
Okay.
personal calendar. And as you know, and so my work calendar I keep separate, but my personal calendar I can combine the two, so I can see things on my phone. The calendars are combined. The reason why I do that because if I'm doing a project, or if I'm meeting with you, or I'm doing something, let's say I'm talking to my mother, I can then plug in.
I love
Uh,
that you said talking to your mother. So everyone, call your mom.
yeah, and what I will do is that she lives in the Midwest,
Yeah,
and
mine too. Mhm.
and so with that in mind, our times are different. So
Mhm.
usually I will say, Mom, we talk weekly. So I'm like, Mom, let's talk at this time and blah blah blah. But I can look at my calendar like,
I
oh,
talk daily to my mom, by the way. Anyway.
I will talk to her. I mean, definitely there's at least
I'm just teasing.
there's at least weekly. Sometimes it's more than that. But it's creating that structure too. So again, going back to technology and the structure, that calendar has helped me because I can then see the open spots I have on both calendars and
That's
plug
great.
right? And I can say, and what I also do is make sure, so with work calendar, I make sure I don't go from one meeting to the next. Basically, I
Yeah,
put 15 minutes before a meeting, 15 minutes after a meeting, so I can have the break I need. And so I've done that. I make sure that if I want to talk to my mom, as I mentioned before, or let's say we're talking to each other, I can look at the calendar and go like, oh, 10 o'clock, I'm going to take a break. So that's the time I'll talk with you and I can talk then. And what I can do is try to look at the calendar like, okay, you know what? I'll be home by 5 or I'll be done at 5. I'm going to take an hour break before I start doing something else. So that's been helpful too. So the calendar, that structure for me is that calendar. I even plug in actions I need to do. So I'll say something like, I need to clean the bathroom. I will literally put that on my calendar on a Saturday or Sunday. And it's just a reminder. It's not alarmed or anything like that.
yeah,
I just put it in as action, and I just can look at it and go like, okay, I need to take care of that. And you know
yeah,
what? What? The thing is, if I don't clean the bathroom, I just move it to the next Saturday. That's what I'll do. I'll move it to a Wednesday. I'll just move it
yeah.
around. But as you mentioned, I think what I recognize about myself that clutter was causing me stress. I did not know,
Yes.
and so even physical clutter was causing me stress.
Oh,
So
yeah, I agree.
I don't think I'm.
It's visual.
It's visual, yes.
Yeah,
So I have to have some organization in my place. It's got to be clean. It's got to be open space. Tables, I try to keep open space. And even after I do some work on it, I have papers on it, I have to clean it back up, or I feel I don't know where I'm going. And so anyway, that's the
yeah.
structure.
I mean,
Technology.
I'll tell you, I met this, woman who is, CEO of her own company, and, I I kid you not, it was a virtual meeting, and she was in the most spectacular setting. The environment around her was not a Zoom screen. It was her own home office. It was exquisite, beautifully designed, and there were other, people on the call, and we just were like, "Where are you? Are you in, like, some fancy hotel lobby?" She's like, "This is my home office." And what she said has really stuck with me, and this is just like a little takeaway for our audience is, if I am exactly what you said, if I'm surrounded and empowered in the space, I feel I can accomplish anything. And that it created organization for her. It created a safe place that was to, she also invested in having a designer come and design it, because investing in that space invests in her as a leader and her ability to
Mm.
support her teams, her ability to accomplish the goals that she sets out for herself. And I will tell you, I've been thinking about, you know, um, the idea of also art and surrounding yourself with visual, positive things that make you feel and inspire you, make you feel like the world is possible. And as I'm sitting and talking to you in a gray room with at least plants, I've been thinking of putting more things on the wall that actually are around my computer, and images that really kind of reinforce my personal professional mission and places where I work. And so I've been even thinking about the power of the space you're also working in and creating that, because you lifted up clutter and that visual and keeping your
Mhm.
is also thinking about how that contributes to, you know, feeling more engaged at work, helping to define your boundaries, and addressing any burnout. Because if you're in a setting that you enjoy, I think you're able to really structure and create that space.
Yeah. Let me just add something you mentioned to what you just said. And I think people, you mentioned putting up pictures and so forth. And what I've seen is people put up pictures that look pretty. But I've asked people, have you taken the time daily or weekly to really intentionally glance at that picture? And what does it mean to you today? What does it mean to you when you put it up? So I started doing this with I have a couple of pictures up right now. And I will actually look at the picture. I would spend every week, I'd look at this picture. I'm like, what does this mean to me today? Because now it's forcing me intentionally to look and appreciate this thing I have on the wall. A plant is forcing me to look. I don't just want it there because it looks pretty. I want to think about it. And so I like
Yeah.
you said those things, the pictures and paintings, but I would recommend this to our audience. Take the time to look at this picture or this plant. Think about who gave it to you. Why do you have it? And just write down a few things about it that day.
Yeah. I mean, I wanna link that to, I've worked in, and having done a lot of capital campaigns, and I've been, very fortunate to also be the person working closely with the architecture team, and I've actually been a part of bringing artists commissioning work, and I see the power of art, especially in, health settings and learning environments, and, just think about, you know, I get inspired in those spaces, and the community that, the organizations have served, I know that they have been inspired in those spaces because they walk into places that are not just full of beautiful visuals, but the messaging that comes from those, artwork or the, setting and the design of the space, I think lends itself. And so I don't think a lot of people have translated those work environments that are positive and are uplifting. I don't think a lot of us have translated that. And you don't have to invest in a lot or get an interior designer, but I think, as you said, think about, where did that plant come from? Why do I have this artwork? What does this mean to me? And surround yourself in that same, at least that's what I think I need to do, because those buildings, those places I've met with colleagues, brought donors through,
Mhm.
worked with clients and constituents, those are inspiring spaces. And then also reminding, that even putting a picture of your organization's, just the words, the mission, sometimes I usually do that, where I literally will print out our organization's mission and I will tape it to the side of my computer as I'm talking to donors or I'm writing a proposal. And behind it, I'll usually put one or two images of the organization's constituents or the community they serve, because that also is, at least for me, inspiring. And I've done that since we've been remote, because, like, okay, I need to be mindful of who we're doing this work for and why. And I like your connection to even those personal affects that inspire us.
Oh yeah. And the reason why I thought about that more than and it made me think when I moved, Deniz know this, but audience, you do not know this. I lived in Portland. I made a quick move to Seattle. I grabbed a studio and I had to be intentionally about what I wanted in storage and the things I want to get rid of. and the things I want to keep until I can figure out where I want to live. Well, as I was going through, decide to get rid of things, a friend of mine said something to me about something I was giving up. And they said, that plate, your mom gave you that plate. I'm like, yes, but I don't really use it. But like, and the person said to me, yeah, but your mom gave it to you. It's not that you keep it because of your mom, but does that plate, does it help you with your memories, some
Oh,
experience that you have with your
oh,
mom?
that's great.
And it was a moment for me to go like, yes, it does. Now I have to be careful because almost everything then had an emotional moment,
Yeah.
right? It's like, okay, everything. So I had to think about why did I want to keep that plate? But it made me now really start to walk around my place on some days when I look at just one object
Yeah.
and I ask myself, why did I keep this object? Why do I have it here now? What memories do I have from it? Who gave it to me? And what's the emotional response to it? So
Yeah.
every now and then, you know how I love the journal. It's a moment for me to journal on something about that.
Yeah. Well, when you're working at home, for many of us who have some colleagues who are frontline in the nonprofit space who can't, at least coming home to a place where you can do your best to leave some of that work at the work environment, but being able to surround yourself that kind of re-energize you to do that work the next day. Because we work in challenging organizations in terms of the mission and the big global initiatives that impact our planet, and it's hard, heavy work. But I think if we have a little bit more of that connection to why we do it in our personal and professional surroundings, I think that hopefully you can carry that forward.
I will. And this is my last questions. Now, again, I'll ask the audience to think about this too, and I'll respond as well. How do you set boundaries when you take time off from work? And that includes personal projects. When you decide I need to stay, how do you keep those boundaries in place? Uh, and I'll,
You're asking the wrong person. I'm not good with that. I
I'll kick off by
yeah.
sharing some things I do, and I will want to hear from you.
Yeah, let's hear what you're doing because I'm not good at that.
As I told you, my calendars are connected. So when I take that time off, turn off my work calendar right away. That's turned off. So I will not see if I'm taking the day off, if it's a mental day, a sick day, the weekends, that work calendar is completely turned off. So I don't see
I
anything else.
love this. Yes, tell me more what else you do.
One thing.
I need to learn.
I will not contact my team members during the weekend. I've let them know that only if it's an emergency, you will hear from me. But other than that, I will not do the thing where I think that we all do. Something comes up in our mind, we're like, oh, I got to remember this. So sometimes that means shooting an
Yeah.
email off, right? I won't do that. I will not do that. I may write
Yeah.
something down, but I've gotten to a point now where I try to turn off on the weekend. So I will not contact the team. In fact, I try to start sending
I
emails.
love that you do that. I'm sure they appreciate that.
Well, and it's both ways. I appreciate it too. I mean,
Yeah.
5 o'clock and the weekends, but I let them know if an emergency come up, contact me. You know.
Yeah.
So those are two examples I do when it comes to taking time off. If I'm off, I'm off.
Mhm.
If the team members are off, they're off, and that means disconnecting from the calendar as well.
That's respectful. That's actually quite respectful because that is not your time, it's their time. So that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's really great as an employer and as a leader to embody that.
And before we go to you, audience, think about this as you respond to this, with your comments. Let us know, what do you do when you take time off? How do you keep those boundaries in place? So, Deniz, what about you?
Yeah. Yeah, as we wrap up, I'm not very good with that. I have done my best to not, text, colleagues on my team. Um, I also am constantly thinking, and so I like to share ideas and thought process, so I'm doing my best not to do that. I have to embody and practice what you're doing a little bit more. My free time I do nonprofit stuff all the time. So whether it's a personal project I'm working on, trying to connect, I'm actually this weekend tomorrow, I'm doing new chief development officer is needs some help. And so I'm doing a coaching session with them, but then it's work again. But I actually enjoy it. So I'm still trying to learn how to find maybe a different hobby. It's probably what I need to do. Although I did do a weaving class. So I kind of stretched my, you know what, at 5:30, I'm done. I have to get in the car and go to this class. So I will tell you, building that structure and having something like that, I'm going to need to have something scheduled so that way I start to practice that more. So, and it doesn't become an extension of like just more nonprofit work, although I love it, but it becomes more of a personal enrichment. So, setting that is key. But I think we're going to wrap up this one. I think you and I definitely want to talk to more people, right? About boundaries, mental health,
That's
and
right.
burnout.
Right.
So, it's a continuing conversation.
All these things we're talking about, especially when it comes to boundaries and mental health, it's a journey, and we're all learning together, and we're going to learn from each other because
Exactly.
we're in each other's shoes, as you mentioned many times. And so that's the hope, is that sharing your experience, audience, and we're going to continue to share ours, but we're going to learn from each other. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you and sharing more with special guest speakers next time.
And why, Deniz? Why do we look for it?
Because we've been in your shoes. Tom, you want to say it?
Because we've been in your shoes. That's right.
That's right. Well,
Right.
you have a wonderful weekend and enjoy your Saturday.
You too. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
Join us next time as we share, advocate, and highlight experiences and ideals from nonprofit colleagues, leaders, and champions.
Subscribe to Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast and be the first to hear our new episodes introducing new topics and guest speakers. Remember, nonprofit friends, you're not alone because we've been in your shoes. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes. Subscribe to Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast and be the first to hear our new episodes introducing new topics and guest speakers. Remember, nonprofit friends, you're not alone because we've been in your shoes.